What up, what up, what up? Welcome to Bleav in Rams, presented by FanDuel. Guys, some news and notes. I'm joined by Nate Atkins of The Athletic, Ryan Anderson of the LAFB Network. And I mean, first of all, how are we doing, guys?
Doing great. And I'm just glad that the Rams got this done this week, and next week's going to be crazy enough. So it's sort of like the big moves out of the way before free agency gets nuts around the league. And I still expect them to be aggressive, but I don't think they can find a bigger swing than Trent McDuffie. So that was kind of fun to see.
Yeah, getting there.
Oh, that old adage, that Les Snead likes to use. If you're going to make it, what is it? If it's inevitable, make it immediate. That's what I was reaching for. And they went it immediate. One of the first trades in the league. So
yeah, they went big. Trent McDuffie, the All-Pro. There's so much out of the Chiefs. There's so much to dive into when it comes to this move and what this move means, how much he's going to end up costing next year as he's in his final year of his deal, what he's going to be 13.5 against the cap. And then potentially could be around 30 million next year. But what's interesting, Nate, I'll go with you first. It almost seemed like Les Snead signaled this yesterday during his presser when he was like, do you know of an All-Pro? But did you see this coming? Because you were working feverishly, I could tell, at home, writing up. You have a great article up on The Athletic. Did you see this coming? Was this sort of imminent, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, all these deals, like, they have to obviously get to a finish line, and this is obviously a massive one. There are many pieces to it. There's many things that had to iron out with, namely with Trent McDuffie wanting to sign an extension with whatever team that he goes to. There's so many layers to this, but I really kind of saw a big move coming first when we got to the end of the season, and Les Snead, general manager, had a press conference, and he talked about how they need to maximize the time they have left with Matthew Stafford. And they felt like they didn't quite do that enough in recent years for understandable reasons, where, Stafford had the back issue and they're thinking about a little bit the future. And they just frankly didn't have the draft capital to make the trades the same way that they used to when they went after Jalen Ramsey and Von Miller and Stafford in the first place. And so when you piece that together with the fact that they had 2 first-round picks this year, I started to think, this team is finally operating from a surplus. And they're in a spot where they could trade the first-round pick that they earned by being in the top 4 at number 29 and still have a pick in the first round that's in the top 15. That's a pretty great spot to be in. And then the other thing that started to tip me off is Les Snead talked about how the secondary was the main area that had to improve in talent. It was the last premium spot on the roster that hadn't gotten an injection. And if you look at his history, Les Snead never drafts cornerbacks anymore, pretty much. And he certainly doesn't draft them very high. And so I just didn't believe that a team that was going to look at their secondary that ended up losing to Sam Darnold in the NFC title game was going to trust 2 rookies, even if they were first-round picks, and just say, I hope this works fast enough before Matthew Stafford retires. And so when you put it in that context, free agency could be an answer, and that certainly was an option. Mm-hmm. You really want to go for that game changer type of player. Those guys don't tend to make it to free agency. When they move like Trent McDuffie just did. They kind of pick their own destination. And so, Les Snead did signal it yesterday. I could just tell he seemed really excited to make a big trade. And we've seen him do it before. And I just kind of had a feeling it was coming. Certainly it could have been for somebody else. This isn't the only cornerback that's very talented in the league. But Trent McDuffie was the one that felt like he could move, because the Chiefs have done this with guys like Tyreek Hill and Joe Thuney, these really talented players that they simply looked at and said, we cannot keep everybody. And rather than let them walk, they tend to really get a haul in return. And so the final thing that really tipped me off was a video that came out from Trent McDuffie at a fan event last August in Kansas City, where a young fan asked him, if you could play for another team other than the Chiefs, who would it be? And he said, I would choose the LA Rams because I'm from LA and all my family can games. And to me, that was the window for McVay to slide in through an agency to kind of pitched the Rams as this ideal spot for Trent McDuffie. It's what they did with Matthew Stafford back when he was asking for a trade. They have so much to offer as a team where you get to live in LA, you get to play for Sean McVay, be a contender.
Mm-hmm.
Also his hometown team. It just ended up to me being such a perfect fit of the player they're looking for, the age that he's at, the place he wants to end up being, the need that they have at the position, and the fact that they have to get this figured out right now. So to me, it just came down to how much is this really going to cost and when's it going to happen? I didn't know. I thought it was going to happen more like this weekend. He did seem to think it would happen before free agency started, but they weren't messing around, and that's Les Snead. He's like, when he wants something, he's going to go get it. And I think the moment that they got to talk to his agency and get at least an indication that, yeah, this is a hometown kid that would really consider this spot. They apparently got in a bidding war, according to the Kansas City Star, with the New York Giants, and the Rams tend to win those bidding wars. And so when there's sticker shock to like how much the cost was to get the trade done, but to them, they not only had to get a player like this in their eyes, they wanted to do it before free agency, before the draft. They wanted this to be like the table-setting move. So that's ultimately how it went down.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, they go out and they get their cornerback one. I think they can check a box with that. And, you know, you look at kind of what Les Snead has done in the past, you know, finding a proven commodity over taking a chance in the draft has kind of been a bit of his MO. But, you know, you look at the depth chart, cornerback is still a need. What do you foresee heading into this legal tampering period next week? And then going into the draft, how much activity do you foresee there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're definitely going to add another cornerback. They just have to. They lost Kobe Durant. He's currently a free agent. They could bring him back. Kella Witherspoon's a free agent. That one just seemed to run its course. But you know, they've got Emmanuel Forbes that they still like on one spot, but you always have to have more than 3 cornerbacks or 4 cornerbacks. You just have to have numbers there. And so they will add one, but I think the advantage to the McDuffie trade is they don't have to force it the same way that they did before. So you look at like the number 13 overall pick. A lot of people have mocked them to take a corner because it's, you know, it was logical. They need this so bad. They're going to force that. They didn't want to be in a spot where if they saw a player at a different position who's a true game changer, that they would feel like they had to pass on him because they need a corner. So think of a guy like, you know, could be Mekhi Lemon, the wide receiver out of USC. It could be someone like Sonny Styles, the linebacker out of Ohio State. They didn't want to get in a spot where they were taking a player they didn't like nearly as much as another one just because they need that top corner, and then still risking whether that rookie can perform in year one and actually be a top outside corner. So I actually think this opens up a lot of possibilities for them. There's just a lot to sort through. I could see them bringing Kobe Durant back and looking at him as, you know, a rotational player with Emmanuel Forbes, and it takes a little off both of them rather than having them start all the time. I could see them go after a different free agent. I could see them bring Cam Curl back, who's a safety that it's going to be harder to afford now with McDuffie. But, you know, they've set themselves up as a more attractive destination for free agents because they're the Super Bowl favorites. And that tends to attract some guys that may take a little bit less, especially those guys who haven't won a ring before, those guys that really feel like that would explode their value on a 1-year deal where they go back to the free agent market. So I think that's why they wanted to do this ahead of time, not just to set their budget and know what they have to work with, but to also kind of be that team that isn't desperate, that isn't begging people to come here. It's actually the opposite, where they say, like, we're the team that everyone should want to play for, between McVay, between LA, between how talented this team is, how ready it is to win. And so, you know, I expect them to still be quite aggressive. I think this is just the start of an offseason that we're going to look back on and feel like this team really, really went for it all. And if they don't end up winning it all, it could be for a number of reasons, but it won't be because they didn't try to do enough and push the chips in. This is feeling a lot more like the 2021 offseason into the season where they traded for Stafford and Von Miller, and they just went for it all. And we'll see if they can have the same result.
And that's the thing I think that's the most interesting about all of this is it's not just, okay, you get to come to LA, you get to play for McVay. No, this is the year the Rams are going to, most likely, if possible, win the Super Bowl. So you're going to come to a team that is trying to win the Super Bowl. So it just makes it so much more attractive than even if the price tag was a little bit higher and you were being sought after by the Giants. So, this is the year. And what's interesting is they gave up the number 29th overall pick, not the 13th. A 5th round pick, a 6th round pick this year, as well as a 3rd round pick in 2027. All that for McDuffie, which, of course, like we mentioned, will have to have some kind of contract reevaluation next season. But I'm sorry, guys. Like, I don't know how you didn't see this all coming, because there's a really funny, not funny, but since 2017, every first round pick that the Rams have had, they've traded.
Except one.
Except for one, because they didn't have a first round pick.
No, they drafted one in Jared Verse, but he's the lone the lone guy in the island.
Right. 2024. Yeah. That's right.
No,
sorry.
It's easy to lose because it's been like a decade and they never keep their picks. So that's what's kind of funny is like Les Snead, he leaned into the whole F them picks, slogan joke type thing. He's put it on shirt and mugs and whatnot. And then for a while there, it was like, well, we don't have the picks to light on fire. So it just kind of went away. I like to call this season's era of Les Snead more like a deploy them picks, which isn't as fun or sexy as F them picks, but it may be more effective in what they're actually trying to do, because they can trade one first round pick and go for what maybe end up being the most expensive trade of the calendar year for Trent McDuffie and still have the number 13 overall pick. That's what they gave themselves trading down last year, trading out of the first round with Atlanta to take Terrence Ferguson. And there was a cost to that, because you could argue that they may have gone to the Super Bowl and won if they'd been a little more aggressive after their secondary last year, instead of taking a tight end that had 11 catches on the season. I was a little critical of them to end the year of like, you had these major needs in special teams and outside corner, and you just kind of hope that everything else would overcome it. And it almost did with the number one offense and the MVP quarterback, but it still ultimately wasn't enough, because if your weaknesses are so pronounced in the postseason, they usually end up coming back to bite you. And so, but what they did by making that trade last offseason is they put themselves in a spot to kind of do a mix of everything. I mean, honestly, if they want to draft a quarterback to develop behind Matthew Stafford, they can still do that. They can trade up from the second round into the late first if they want. They could trade back from 13 and add other picks and take that quarterback. And it all looks different because they went out and got Trent McDuffie. It doesn't look like they're passing on this season just to get next year's quarterback or the future quarterback if they end up doing that, because they went out and got an All-Pro. And that's that needle that Les Snead was trying to thread this offseason. And I think what we're just seeing right now is the fruits of the labor of that patient overall vision to trade back last year, finally get to a spot where you have multiple first-round picks, bank on one of them being in the top 15 and it ends up at number 13. They just ended up being a team that got to play with more on their chessboard than the average team, while also being the most aggressive player in the league. And so that's why they're set up for a very interesting offseason.
Yeah.
Yeah, Snead had that quote coming out yesterday that was such a great quote about wanting to be aggressive in free agency. He was speaking more specifically so that they don't have to be desperate in the draft, and they've definitely set themselves up for that. I wanted to ask you about kind of the scheme fit and specifically how he's going to play next to Quentin Lake, who they've locked into a good contract. So, Trent McDuffie's a guy who can play inside and outside, played a lot inside this last year at the slot position. What kind of versatility does that add to the defense?
Yeah, as I thought through this Trent McDuffie trade before it happened, all the reasons we listed made it a perfect fit. The only slight hesitation I had was what the Rams truly need is the top outside corner, and where Trent McDuffie is truly at his absolute best is in the slot. He was a first-team All-Pro player as a nickel corner. Now, he did make second-team All-Pro, playing a good amount of outside. There's more to him than that. But it was interesting to think through when Quentin Lake plays so much of the slot role, and Quentin Lake just got extended for 3 years and like $39 million. But what I think what this signals is that they realized last year that all it takes is one injury to Quentin Lake, and you don't have the thing you built the whole defense on. All the defense, frankly, fall apart for a stretch there in the season when Quentin Lake wasn't out there. And so this kind of gives them an option to not have to play with fire quite the same way, to where if there were to be an injury to Quentin Lake, who's normally your nickel corner, now all of a sudden Trent McDuffie can play a lot of nickel and be arguably the best in the league at doing it. And the trickle-down effect is just at outside corner, which you're kind of back to square one with where Quentin Lake was as an elite slot corner anyway. But when Quentin Lake is out there, I still think they're going to figure it out, because they like to play a lot of dime. And when you play dime with 6 defensive backs, you have 2 interior defensive backs. That can be at times McDuffie and Lake. There's times where Lake will, he rotates from nickel to free safety to strong safety. Right now they have a strong safety opening because Cam Curl is a free agent. If Curl doesn't end up coming back or they don't fill that role as much, that gives them a chance to move the chessboard around a little bit. But for the most part, I think that Trent McDuffie primarily will be your top outside cornerback, with Lake still playing that star role from nickel corner to strong safety to free safety. And now what you have is 2 of the brightest players in the league on your back end. Quentin Lake brought so much to this defense, and communication and leadership and seeing things before the snap. Now you have a second player like that, and you have him at a different spot of the defense on the outside. And I just think that's what they're going to bank this on. Is if you really look at Chris Shula's defense, it's built in resources from the front, where they drafted Jared Verse in the first round, and they've got Byron Young and Kobe Turner, and they keep drafting these early guys there, Braden Fisk as well. But schematically, it's built on the coverages on the back end, playing in dime and nickel, rotating the star position around, disguising the coverages. Late last season, though, what we saw was they kind of had to fall back into shells a little bit more and play more zone, because they just didn't have the outside corners that they felt like they could trust in man coverage. When you go up against really, really good offenses and quarterbacks who are humming, like Caleb Williams and Sam Darnold, if you get it just a little bit too predictable, you end up letting teams throw quick enough to where that pass rush just isn't getting home. Those guys in the pass rush I mentioned, if you look at the underlying numbers, they were like top 5 in the league in pressures in the postseason. This team didn't get a lot of postseason sacks, though. They just couldn't finish the deal. And so what is going to help Jared Verse and Byron Young finish more sacks? It's having a coverage player like this who can really lock down the back end, help lock down a top receiver in man coverage, make quarterbacks hold the ball a little bit more until the receivers separate in man coverage, rather than just kind of knowing where the holes are in zone coverage. That's what I think they're going for. And it's just going to be interesting with a new defensive backs coach too, and Jimmy Lake instead of Pleasant, because Jimmy Lake, he knows Trent McDuffie better than pretty much anybody. Recruited him to Washington, was his head coach there. He's been a defensive coordinator in this league with the Falcons. I think they're going to really empower Jimmy Lake to really make this thing hum on the back end, to flip it from we're going to play in shells and zone coverage and hold on and hope our pass rush wins, to we're going to be more enforcers on the back end in a way that forces you to deal with our pass rush. And that's the upside of this defense now.
But see, isn't that the part that's interesting? Because Ryan and I, Nate, talk about, they seem to have loved Aubrey Pleasant, and he's the former DB coach. And even though issues were presented at secondary, those pieces were presented to Aubrey Pleasant by the staff, by the front office, right? So he's just trying to do the best he can with the toolkit he has. Now, does it seem like it makes more sense since Jimmy Lake is there, obviously head coach, former, at University of Washington? Do these moves now sort of start to make sense? It's like almost like seeing a movie, and then you see the ending at first and you're like, I don't get it. And then they like back play, like how the movie, like the buildup of what that, because it didn't seem like we understood necessarily Aubrey was there for 7 of 9 years. They had such a close relationship. Does this now sort of make more sense?
Yeah, I mean, you have to feel for Aubrey Pleasant right now because, you know, he served a lot of roles on this staff for over the course of 7 years. He was obviously the defensive backs coach, but also the assistant head coach. And he was probably the guy most responsible for setting the culture with guys other than Sean McVay, who obviously sets the whole thing. He was really instrumental in getting Emmanuel Forbes to kind of change his outlook and build confidence. And he was big in building up Quentin Lake from a 6th-round pick into a player that they extend. But he kind of lost on circumstance here, I think. The secondary wasn't all that good at the end of the season, and it's a little unfair. It's certainly unfair to Aubrey because he's working with aging veterans and guys drafted 3rd round and later, and, you know, doing the best that he can with that. He probably looks at a trade like Trent McDuffie and thinks, where was that when I was here? But that's ultimately what they did, is they replaced Aubrey Pleasant with 2 different guys. So they moved Jimmy Lake into the defensive backs coach role, and they added Cliff Kingsbury, you know, the former Cardinals head coach and Commanders offense coordinator, to be the assistant head coach. This is a guy who's been a head coach at college and in the NFL. And so they kind of split up the role that Aubrey filled in a lot of different ways with guys that they, I think, believe that ultimately those 2 will end up being more powerful than the one. That's what they're going to have. And it's a decent bet in the fact that they have Trent McDuffie now, because Jimmy Lake, where he's going to have to really make up ground in replacing Aubrey Pleasant, is that he doesn't have the same connections with the secondary. He wasn't there to build up Quentin Lake, to reconfigure the mindset of Emmanuel Forbes and all that. But he's the one who recruited Trent McDuffie to Washington and got him to a level where he could be a 1st-round pick. And what often happens for position coaches is they end up trying to, the best ones that I've followed and covered in this league, coach the group through an individual. Meaning, like, if your best player can embody all the things that you want them to embody, if they can become masters of the scheme and take your coaching onto the field where you can't go, it ends up making you a more powerful coach. And he's got that guy in Trent McDuffie, who they're also lucky kind of walks in with his own established reputation. It's kind of like when they added Davante Adams last year. No one on the team is like, who's this guy and what's he bring? Everyone knows what Davante Adams brings. Trent McDuffie's similar, and, you know, not a veteran the same way as Adams, but he's won 2 Super Bowls. And so that's a guy that, like, when he tells a young player to do something, are you going to just ignore what the 2-time Super Bowl champ, who is about to sign for a $30 million deal, says that he thinks you should do? Like, players follow players for the most part, even more than their coaches. And so that's, I think, the marriage that they're going for. And it's unfortunate for Aubrey Pleasant, but I do think that making that switch shows you how serious the Rams are about winning this year. It is really hard for coaches to move off their loyalties and to let people go that they're really, really close with. And even when they realize it frankly wasn't all your fault because we didn't give you enough, but to them, they can't wait around and see if you can level up as a coach with a better player and just hope that works. They're going to go out and make the aggressive moves to bring both of these in. And also they had to give Cliff Kingsbury a role of some sort that was attractive to him. He's got a great resume. They wanted to promote Nathan Scheelhaus to offensive coordinator. It's kind of hard to sell a guy like Cliff Kingsbury, just be the passing game coordinator. That's a big step down from an offensive coordinator role he had last year. He probably could get a better role than that somewhere else. They really had to look at this thing and think, how do we make all these pieces fit and maximize them? And I think that's what they're trying to do.
You know, you bring up the $30 million number, and he's going to get a large extension at some point. You know, this defense is set to get a lot more expensive with some of these expiring rookie contracts coming up. Puka Nacua is going to reset the market, it sounds like. I mean, where do you start to prioritize the contracts for this team? I mean, I know it's a ball of wax or a can of monkeys or something like that to talk contracts at this point. But I mean, where are your priorities lying in your head right now?
Yeah, I think that's where you're going to feel the cost of Trent McDuffie the most, is not so much the draft capital, but when he signs a new deal for between $25 to $30 million for 3 to 4 years, that is going to take from what they could give a number of guys. They've got Puka Nacua, Kevin Dotson, Steve Avila, and Byron Young, who all have 1 year left on their deal. They love all those guys. They want to bring them back. And it's just going to be hard to make every single guy fit. Now, what's good for them is they are projected to have a top 5 cap space number across the league in each of the next 2 years. Now, a big part of that is there's no quarterback under contract other than Stetson Bennett for those years. So the first order of business is going to be readjusting Stafford's contract. That's also what they said yesterday when we talked to Sean McVay and Les Snead, is they're close on that. I would expect that to come here soon. I'm not sure if that will be an extension to add another year to the deal, if that's just raising the salary for this year. They got to keep it a little open-ended because they don't know how long Stafford's going to want to play. But for as long as he's at this level, they're going to, if he wants to come back, he's coming back. I mean, so it's a little harder to plan all this in exact ways. It's answers that Stafford doesn't know yet either. You don't know if, he starts to decline and doesn't want to do it as long as he thought maybe he would. I mean, I know Stafford, from having covered him before, didn't think he'd even be playing this late in his career as it is. So they just have to kind of be a little touch and go with some of that. It probably means waiting on one of these guys that they otherwise would like to sign early. Looking at them, though, I think Puka Nacua's, that's the one that they have to sign. They have to go top of the market. It's just too important and too young of a player, too great of a player not to do that. I would think that, Byron Young is probably second in that group, just on impact of position. A guy that just made his first Pro Bowl and led the team in sacks. And then you're looking at 2 guards that are, really good. I really like Steve Avila and Kevin Dotson. I thought was absolutely, he was arguably their best lineman this year, but they play the same position and they play in the interior of the line. This is where good teams challenge themselves to find some avenues to replace a guy, even when they want to keep him. So you think about, like, the Chiefs just had to let Trent McDuffie go, and they love that guy. So Patrick Mahomes tweeted, "Damn," right when that trade went down. Like that is not going to sit super well over there. But the reason that they can, number one, they have to do it for money. And number one, the other thing is the reason they feel like they can do it is they can draft and replace that position. So that's what the Rams are going to challenge themselves to do. I think the offensive line is the main area. Les Snead sort of tipped or hinted that that's going to be a focus of the draft. If you look at it, a lot of these contracts are going to come up here soon. Warren McClendon's going to be a free agent after next year if he ends up being your right tackle. Coleman Shelton is not far off there either. So it's really only Alaric Jackson who has a contract that's longer, and it's even not like forever in his way either. So that's where offensive line, especially your interior offensive line, that's a much easier draft and develop spot. I think the way they looked at it was they don't trust, for whatever reason, they don't want to draft cornerbacks. Maybe they think that's too risky. Maybe they don't think they're ready coming out of college. That was a spot where they said, we're going to go get an established guy. We're just going to pay what it takes. And then you have to make up the difference somewhere else. And I think at least one of those guard spots is going to be where they have to do it.
Yeah. Ryan and I were talking about, which, by the way, per FanDuel Sportsbook, the Rams moved up ahead of the Seattle Seahawks to now be the favorites to win the Super Bowl. But Ryan did a funny, and last year, this many cornerbacks, the year before, this many cornerbacks in the draft, right? So they haven't. And it might be because adapting to the NFL from college is not easy in terms of game speed and understanding schemes and such. And the other thing, and I know we need to be respectful of your time, it's 3:50. We are here with Nate Atkins of The Athletic and Ryan Anderson of the LAFB Network to discuss a massive trade for the Rams acquiring Trent McDuffie for some picks. How much time do we have left with you? Because we can pick your brain all day. 5 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes is good.
10 minutes. Okay. No, and I think one of the things that this layered approach that I always talk about with the Rams, which is, navigating the future being sustainable with your decision making, but also going all in. Like that is the thing that's to me very fascinating. And the other thing that Les Snead said yesterday that I thought was the most interesting was the reason that they're quote unquote good at drafting or better drafters is because they don't plan to fill holes on draft night. They plan to just have edge and advantage on draft night. So that, like you said, the best available player that makes sense with their culture or their system, or are guys that can navigate challenges, adversity, that's who they want. And then they build from there, as opposed to, and that's what I thought was really interesting, because Les Snead was very candid about it. He said, we don't want to come into the draft and be desperate. We think if you have holes to fill, you're going to reach, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to over leverage. Yeah. That's all I was going to say. I think it's interesting what Les Snead is doing over there. But no, I think the thing is they have to they have to make moves for the defensive side of the ball, because, we don't really know how a 38-year-old, granted coming off an MVP campaign, is going to feel. I mean, he had a back issue early in the season, so I think you got to build up your defense, because the old adage goes, defense wins championships. And that seemed to be their biggest issue when they were up against the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, I feel like what great GMs do is they don't count on career years repeating. And so they just got that out of Matthew Stafford, who led the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns and won an MVP. It's an amazing year, and there's a lot of reason to be really excited for him coming back. But it would be a bit foolish and risky, I think, to just assume he's going to do the same exact thing at age 38. Same goes for Devontae Adams, who's going to be turning 34, who just led the league with 14 touchdown catches. You can have a lot of faith in those guys, but if they just put out as good of a year as they could possibly imagine when Adams was new and Stafford's coming off the back, and it still came up a little bit short of the Super Bowl. And so the odds were, if they just rolled that team back and had it play like it was, they were going to take a step back more likely than a step forward. And so they had to fix some other areas. They need to put a little less on this passing game to carry this team. And specifically, you look at the two Seattle matchups. That's where that has to be different. The first or the last two Seattle matchups, the one in Seattle on Thursday night, Stafford threw for like 500 yards in that game and 5 touchdown passes. And Puka Nacua went for 225 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they still didn't win. And then the last one in the NFC title game, I thought that was arguably Stafford's best game of the season. If you just kind of watch it, I don't know that he made a bad decision in that game. I think he might have had like a couple missed throws early in the game. He was absolutely on one. And again, it wasn't enough. And the two areas that killed them were special teams and the secondary. And so those are the areas they have to fix. Special teams is much more nuanced. That's not about finding a Trent McDuffie. That's about, finding a new special teams coordinator that they added with Bubba Ventrone and drafting. That's where I think you're going to see a lot of those day 3 picks. That's where I'd like to see this team do something a little different, where you think about last year, they're in a spot where they don't have a lot of roster needs, so they draft for the future. So they end up taking Jarquez Hunter out of Oregon State in the 4th round at running back, even though they have Kyron Williams and Blake Corum, because at some point he can become a number 2 if there's an injury or Blake Corum moves on. But he didn't have a role last year. He didn't play basically at all because he's not a special teams player. They need to start drafting guys for a special teams value. I think that's what they're going to do this year. And then, like you said, on defense, they had to do something different in the secondary. It's interesting. Last year's focus on defense was the run defense. So they get Poona Ford and they get Nate Landman, and they mostly fixed that. It was pretty darn good outside of a stretch where Quentin Lake and Poona Ford were hurt in the season. Now it's about completing this defense with the coverage on the outside. And so Trent McDuffie is obviously the big swing there, but they need to do a little bit more. And that could be bringing Kobe Durant back. That could be spending the number 13 pick on a guy like Mansour Delane out of LSU if he ends up being there, or somebody else there in the first or second round. I think they're going to need one more really solid investment there to not pin everything on Emmanuel Forbes. But if they get that, it's hard to really find a weak link in the defense on paper, where they're loaded up front. They've got two studs in the secondary in Lake and McDuffie. They've got other pretty good players in the secondary, Tank McCullough and Cam Kitchens. They got like a lot of useful players. They've got Nate Lamon at linebacker. Outside of maybe trying to find an upgrade on like Omar Spates at the other linebacker spot, but they end up subbing that out a lot of the nickel and dime defenses. So they're pretty loaded on defense now just by getting McDuffie. Last year they had the lowest paid defense in the NFL. They finished top 10 in points, but you did see by the end of the year it was not a championship level defense. It's hard to be that as the lowest paid unit. Now they've kind of tilted a little bit more to, they're going to sign McDuffie, I assume, to a very big deal. They're going to end up making this to where it's still an offense first franchise, but it's not as disproportionate as it was last year. So they've got a plan for the offense to maybe not be the number one scoring offense in the NFL. And also it's worth adding, they just lost their offensive coordinator. Mike LaFleur just went to the Cardinals. Nathan Scheelhaus, who's very talented but very young, stepping in. We know it's Sean McVay's offense, but there is an effect to things like that. So I think they're planning on, we're not expecting to be the number one offense, though we know we can be, but we need to be a little bit stronger in special teams and defense, be a more rounded team, because ultimately the team that won the Super Bowl this year was the most complete team in the Seahawks, who were loaded on special teams, absolutely incredible on defense, and still pretty good on offense, as it turned out. I think they looked a lot at the Seahawks in 3 matchups against them, and then watching the Super Bowl and realized we may believe we're the better team because our offense was so great and we should have won those games. They were the more complete team, though, and that showed up when it really mattered. So that's the shift I think we're seeing right now.
Well, that was amazing. I know we need to get you out of here, Nate, but any final thoughts, Ryan? I mean, this kind of perfectly sums up how we've all been feeling in terms of what the Rams needed to do, and already they're getting things done. Go for it.
I mean, the only thing I have to say is it sounds like I've got my guy, Micah Morris out of Georgia, interior offensive line. He gets the Nate the Great stamp of approval, it sounds like. I don't know if you've done any research on this guy. I fell in love with him after 5 minutes looking at stuff with him. But yeah, I mean, let's get this guy on the road. He's been working hard for the last couple of days on this story, so I'm sure he's got more of these to do.
Yeah. I'm behind on draft prep, I'll admit. I was at the combine and the Rams weren't. So there were big things to figure out with Trent McDuffie before the draft. But yeah, that's the mode we're going to step into after next week when they do some free agency. And then it's a really important draft for them to complete the roster and fill some of these positions and still have a team that they feel like can win it all this year, but also has something going for beyond this year too. So that's it's fascinating to think that they still, after this big trade, have more than $25 million in cap space for this year and 7 draft picks, including number 13 overall. So there's still a spot to continue to be aggressive.
Yeah, we will keep you posted on all things Rams news. Bleav in Rams, presented by FanDuel. Nate Atkins, thank you from The Athletic. We appreciate your insight. Always bringing it. Such great insight. Ryan Anderson, LAFB Network. This is just the beginning, everybody. So we will keep you posted with the very latest news and notes from Los Angeles. Thanks, guys.